On the morning of October 11th, 1942, a lookout on an American destroyer saw a yellow speck where no human thing should still have been alive. The ship altered course. As sailors crowded the rail, the speck became a 4-foot raft, and the raft became a man so burned, cracked, and hollow-eyed that the first courseman thought he was lifting a body that had not yet accepted the fact. Salt had whitened his cheeks. His lips were split into dark seams. When they pulled him onto the stretcher, he did not ask for water. He stared at the pale Pacific sky and whispered that he still owed someone a pack of camels. The men carrying him looked at one another. No one on that deck yet knew that the debt had begun in the sky and had lasted 28 days. 4 weeks earlier, Lieutenant Jack Reynolds had crossed the flight deck of the Enterprise with the easy confidence of a man who still believed skill could bargain with fate. He was 23, broad-shouldered, quick with a grin, and young enough to mistake confidence for protection. Before the war, he had been a football star in Ohio. In the Navy, he had become what he considered better: a fighter pilot on a carrier in the South Pacific, part of the force trying to hold the line around Guadalcanal while ships, planes, and men disappeared into the Solomon Sea. The flight deck that morning smelled of fuel and hot metal. Engines thundered. Signalmen moved through prop wash with the speed of men who knew delay could kill as surely as enemy fire. Before climbing into his Wildcat, Jack touched the inside lining of his jacket where a photograph of Emily was stitched into the cloth. She was waiting in Ohio in the picture, smiling from a world of summer dresses and ordinary weather. He never took the photograph out in public. Men about to fly combat did not display tenderness on deck. Beside his plane stood Charles Wilson, the older pilot everyone called Old Man. He was not old in civilian terms. War had simply worked on him longer. His face was cut by weather and service, his movements economical, his calm free of theatre. Jack admired him and wanted to beat him in equal measure. While ordnance crews worked beneath the wings, Jack told him he would be the first to score against the Japanese ships that day. Wilson looked at him with a flat, patient amusement and said that if Jack managed it, he would owe him a pack of camels. If not, the debt ran the other way. Jack took the wager gladly. At 23, death still seemed like something that announced itself properly, not something that came between one joke and the next. The mission was simple on paper. A Japanese transport run, protected by destroyers and fighter cover, was moving through the Solomon waters towards the battle around Guadalcanal. By September 1942, the campaign had already turned the sea into a graveyard of task forces, patrol boats, and drifting men. Carriers launched planes into skies already full of exhaustion. Destroyers hunted at night. Most men who went into the water never returned with anything more than a last known position. Launch came in violence and order. The signal dropped. Jack's fighter roared down the deck and climbed free into hard blue air. Below him, the carrier shrank into gray geometry, cutting white wake through a vastness too large for any ship to own. Up there he felt closest to the clean version of himself, the one made of training, reflex, and speed. The sea looked polished from altitude. War looked manageable. That was the seduction of flight. It made height feel like control. Then the attack run broke apart. Japanese Zeros came down through the sun. Radios snapped with warning. Tracers slashed the air. Jack rolled, climbed, banked, fired, missed. Then his own aircraft took hits. The first rattled the frame. The second reached deeper. The engine coughed. Fuel smoke and fire punched into the cockpit. Training narrowed the world. Unlatch. Hold steady if possible. Get out before the fire reached the tank. Then he saw Wilson. The older pilot's plane was lower and ahead, trailing black smoke. For one frozen beat, It still looked salvageable. Then it dipped, heavy and irreversible, and started toward the sea. No farewell crossed the radio. A minute earlier they had been two pilots trading a joke. Now Wilson was dropping out of the sky while Jack fought his canopy release. He bailed because training overruled every other impulse. The parachute opened. His burning fighter fell away. The sky, which had looked like a stage for skill, became only the place from which he descended into helplessness. The water hit him hard. He surfaced choking, cut free of the dragging chute, and turned among floating debris and spreading oil. He looked for another raft, another chute, another voice. There was nothing. Then he saw the yellow rescue raft, absurdly small against the Pacific. He clawed his way into it, nearly capsized it, and collapsed inside. The raft held what American planners called survival gear: a little fresh water, a few flares, some chocolate, fishing hooks, dye marker, enough to postpone death, not enough to feel safe. Jack counted the supplies twice because numbers suggested order. The numbers also told the truth. Luck, weather, and enemy patrols would decide the rest. If rescue came soon, he might live. If not, the raft was only a delay. Night dropped quickly over the Solomon Sea. Heat left the rubber. Water and sky merged into one moving blackness. Sometime after midnight he heard the unmistakable throb of a destroyer. His hand went to a flare and stopped. The lesson had already become simple. Not every ship meant rescue. He lay flat in the raft and waited. The engine grew louder. Water hissed under steel. Somewhere in the dark a warship passed close enough for him to feel danger without seeing it. If he fired, Japanese sailors might find him. If he stayed silent, Americans certainly would not. He chose silence. The destroyer passed. It kept him alive. It also stripped away the first layer of his pride. He had imagined a pilot's death as something upright and burning. Instead, his first important act after falling from the sky was to survive by making himself invisible. Morning showed him how quickly the sea could begin its work. His skin already felt too tight under the sun. His mouth had changed shape around thirst. He drank one measured sip and touched the seam of Emily's photograph through the jacket. Home was too large a thought to face directly. Then he heard a weak, human sound off his left. Another raft rode low in the swell. In it lay Kid Miller, one of the youngest pilots in their circle aboard ship. His face burned, his eyes unfocused, one side of his body shaking with shock. Jack paddled over and tied the rafts together. Miller looked at him with naked dependence, and that look decided everything. Jack could have seen him as added weight, another mouth, another problem. Instead, he heard himself say they were going to make it. He recounted the water, the chocolate, the hooks, the flares, and split the supplies for 2 men. The decision gave him structure. It also trapped him. Alone, he might have slipped into fear. With Miller beside him, he had to become the man who knew what to do, even when he did not. They built a routine, because routine is what men invent when they cannot control outcome. Jack rationed water by the mouthful, chocolate by the bite, and speech by how much spit Miller could spare. He showed the younger man how to wet cloth with seawater for the burns, how to trail the fishing line, how to use the stars for bearing. At night, Miller talked in fragments about Kansas, about the wife he had left behind, and about the child he had learned was coming just before he shipped out. He had not even decided whether he wanted a son or a daughter. Jack listened and kept his own private life sealed inside the jacket lining with Emily's picture. On the raft there was no room for emotion that did not help a man last another hour. On the 7th day their line finally struck. Jack hauled in a small fish with shaking hands while Miller laughed and cried at once. They tore it apart, raw, and swallowed it greedily, taking food and a little moisture from the same flesh. For an hour the world seemed less murderous. Then Jack saw an aircraft low against the horizon. Its shape marked it as American. Rescue stopped being theoretical. He stood as much as the raft allowed, shouted and fired one of the flares. Red fire climbed into the sky. Both men stared at the aircraft as if willpower could turn it. It never did. The plane held course and vanished into cloud. The flare had spent itself magnificently into nothing. That was the moment Jack understood that hope could injure more deeply than fear. Fear was honest, hope promised, and then withdrew. After the plane vanished, Miller changed faster. It was as if the sight of rescue had pulled the pins from whatever still held him together. He began hearing things that were not there, and seeing places that belonged to land. Once he asked whether the corn in Kansas had been cut. Another time he leaned toward the water, insisting he saw a fence line just beyond the swell. Jack caught him by the harness and dragged him back before the rafts rolled apart. From then on, keeping Miller alive meant guarding not only his body, but his mind. Jack answered hallucination with orders. Sit still. Drink this. Look at me. Breathe through your mouth. The orders worked for minutes, never for long. Each time Miller looked to him for the next step, Jack had to inhabit confidence he no longer felt. By the 12th day, the sharks made themselves known. The first struck the underside of the raft with a testing shove that traveled up through Jack's hips and spine. He looked down and saw the pale roll of a belly and the dark confidence of something that had been killing long before this war. He beat the water with the paddle. The shark circled away and came back. Others followed over the next nights. Fear became exhausting without ever becoming dramatic. It was not the attack that wore him down. It was the waiting, the need to stay alert while his body begged for unconsciousness. He drove them off when he could, striking and splashing in bursts of stubborn violence. By dawn, he would be shaking from fatigue. The result was survival, one night at a time. The cost was sleep, and once sleep begins to go, judgment soon follows. Water dwindled to almost nothing. Jack scraped dew before sunrise, sucked fluid from raw fish, and forced Miller to do the same. Their lips thickened and split. Salt sores opened along their necks and hands. The sun peeled skin from shoulders and knees until every movement felt like abrasion against a live wound. On land, such suffering would have demanded witnesses. At sea, it went on in silence. Jack found himself remembering ordinary things with a bitterness that surprised him. A faucet, a tin cup, coffee gone cold. Need makes abundance look criminal. Yet even that bitterness helped. It tied him to a world of houses and tables and people who still expected tomorrow. On the 18th day, they heard Japanese voices before they saw the patrol boat. The sound came oddly over the water, flattened in the heat. Then the craft emerged from glare, small by naval standards, but monstrous at their scale, crossing less than 500 yards away. Miller started to move. Jack clamped a hand over his mouth and pushed him flat against the raft. The younger man struggled weakly, half panic, half confusion. Jack held harder. The patrol boat slowed. A shout carried over the sea. Another answered. For a few suspended seconds, Jack believed the boat had turned toward them. It had not. It resumed course and moved off, leaving only engine note and wake behind. The choice had kept them free of enemy hands. It had also hardened something in Jack. He was not trying to live at any price. He was trying to live without surrendering the terms of his survival. Somewhere after that, Emily began appearing on the raft. At first, She was only a shape assembled by glare and thirst, a trick of exhaustion wearing the face hidden in his jacket. Then she settled into detail. She sat near the stern, as if the raft had always been wide enough for three. Jack knew she was not real. The knowledge did not dismiss her, it only made her necessary. He began speaking to her in the spaces when Miller slept or muttered. He told her the sun was worse than enemy fire because it never hurried and never missed. He told her he could no longer remember the taste of cold water without first imagining pain. As long as he could still form sentences for another human presence, even an invented one, he had not yet become entirely animal. The result was a fragile hold on language. The cost was that reality began thinning under his hands. Miller worsened in small steps that added up to catastrophe. His burns turned wet at the edges. His eyes lost the ability to settle on one world. He spoke to his unborn child as if the child were already beside the raft. He apologized to his wife for leaving her with the naming. Jack kept fishing, kept counting stars when he still could, kept answering with instructions because instructions were sturdier than comfort. But the routine that had once held them together now revealed its cruelty. Every day Jack could save Miller from falling overboard. Every day he could not save him from the inward slide. On the 22nd night, Miller slipped into a quiet that felt almost merciful. Near dawn, the last shallow rise left his chest and did not return. Death on the raft came without speech and without lesson. Jack sat through sunrise with one arm around the body, unable to make the next necessary choice. He had told himself from the first morning that bringing Miller back was now the mission. That mission had kept him disciplined, decent, and moving. With the body cooling beside him, purpose collapsed. Still, he could not let go at once. He held Miller through the heat of the day as if refusal itself might count for something. By sunset, the raft had grown too small for survivor and corpse. Jack eased the body over the side. The sea took it instantly. Sharks came within seconds, cutting through the water where his promise had disappeared. The result was absolute solitude. The cost was larger than loneliness. With Miller gone, Jack lost the external reason he had used to command himself. After that, Emily no longer came only as comfort. She asked the one question he could not answer. When are you coming back? At first he tried dates, then jokes, then silence. Finally he admitted he did not know what back meant anymore. That was the real wound the sea had opened. Return was no longer a matter of being found by an American ship. He could survive and still never recover the young man who had launched from the carrier expecting victory, admiration, and a proper war story. The Pacific had stripped that man down to thirst, fear, obligation, and endurance. Once learned, that knowledge would not wash off with the salt. For 2 days after Miller's death, Jack hovered at the edge of surrender. He lay flat in the raft, too weak to curse properly, his eyes nearly swollen shut, his body reduced to sores, bone, and effort. At times he thought of Wilson not as an older pilot or mentor, but as a man whose death had been swift enough to preserve dignity. Jack had once believed a pilot ought to go down with his machine rather than waste away in rubber and sun. Now he understood the lie inside that idea. Dying quickly is not morally superior to staying alive slowly. It is simply easier to imagine. The sea preferred persistence because persistence allowed it to collect payment in installments. That knowledge did not make Jack noble. It made him stubborn, which in extremity is often the only usable virtue. On the 24th night, he dreamed of Wilson. The older pilot sat upright in another yellow raft some distance away, a cigarette burning between his fingers, as if weather no longer applied to him. Jack called to him and tried to paddle closer, but the distance held. Wilson looked exactly as he had on deck before launch, weathered, patient, unimpressed. He said Jack still owed him the pack. Then he pointed past Jack's shoulder and told him to head north. Their roads were not the same, he said, and that was all. Jack woke before dawn with the dream sitting on him like orders. In better condition, he might have laughed at himself for taking direction from a dead man conjured by dehydration. On the raft, skepticism had become an expensive luxury. He looked at the fading stars, the angle of light, the pull of current, and decided to trust the dream because trust in anything was better than lying down. That decision changed the shape of the remaining days. Jack forced his body to work the raft northward in miserable little increments. The strokes were almost laughable against the scale of the Pacific, but they gave him back one essential thing: action. He was no longer only enduring, he was choosing a direction. In extremity, direction can matter as much as distance. On the 26th day, Jack took out the final flare and held it across his palms like the last solid object in a dissolving world. Earlier flares had been equipment. This one had become belief. 4 had once meant options. 1 meant judgment. He tucked it under his arm and fumbled at the inner lining of his jacket until he found the seam where Emily's photograph was stitched into the cloth. With a pencil stub softened by damp, he wrote a few lines beside it.